One of President Obama's underlying goals is to establish a new era of engagement. In today's world, the line that separates national or local matters from those that are international is increasingly blurred. We must all be students of the world and global citizens. The German Fulbright program, the DAAD, the Humboldt Stiftung, and many other programs have played an important role in enriching the bilateral relationship between our two nations. Senator William Fulbright was a visionary man who dreamed of a peaceful future for all mankind. 20 years after the program that bears his name was created, Senator Fulbright described the goals of the program, quote, to bring a little more knowledge, a little more reason, and a little more compassion into world affairs, and thereby to increase the chance that nations will learn at last to live in peace and friendship. Those goals still hold true, and for that reason, Senator Fulbright is one of my heroes. I thought tonight I would give a condensed, very condensed version of some town halls I've been conducting with university and gymnasium students throughout Germany. And one aspect of those town halls are what I call heroes. And I thought it's particularly relevant at Thanksgiving that we should give thanks for some heroes. Now, why should I talk about heroes and why should you care, more importantly? One, I hope it's a little bit of a personal insight as to some of the aspirations and dreams and ideals that I hold highly. But also, I think I'm a little bit of a window on America. And there are also some, I think, some important lines of history that pass through the German-American relations, as well as some very America-specific. And lastly, that touch upon some of the issues we face today. The heroes that I've chosen tonight fall into a couple of categories. One category, and William Fulbright is an example of that, are people who had the courage to seize a moment in history. Another category is that they had the courage to stand up, even in the face of enormous opposition and fear in some cases. Another aspect of heroes that I am particularly enamored with are those that are able to make enormous change in peace. The first few of my heroes are all from the 1940s, principally. William Fulbright, senator from 1944 to 1974. What state, by the way? Arkansas. Developed the notion in 1946 for what has become the Fulbright program. Again, somebody who said, you know what, we're not going to relive the lessons, the harsh, painful, traumatic lessons of post-World War I. Let's immediately find a way, as he said those 20 years later, to share knowledge and share reason. He started this notion in 1946, not with unanimous approval by any means. Today, there are 180 Fulbright programs in the world. The German program started in 1952 and has had 40,000 members since 1952. Same year, Stuttgart. This man gave a very important speech. Does anyone know what it is? Called the Speech of Hope. James F. Burns, at that time Secretary of State, September of 1946. It was significant because, and by the way, there are a couple of guys, in the interest of time, I don't have up here. Lucius Clay would have been one of them. None of these, by the way, none of these heroes, and I can certainly say none of us, are perfect. But Clay was a very important figure in the immediate years following World War II in this country. And James F. Burns was in constant dialogue with Clay in 1946. It was called the Speech of Hope because it was the first time that German citizens themselves heard that we were prepared to invest in reconstructing a civil society in Germany. It was an extraordinarily important moment. As the lore has it, Burns took a train, I forget where, from Stuttgart, I think to Frankfurt, someone here may know this, and was mobbed when he got off the train because people had been listening to the speech on the radio. It took an enormous amount of courage, and Burns is in my Hero Hall of Fame. Next up 9 months later, anybody have a guess as to who this is? Somebody said his name a minute ago.
George Marshall.
George C. Marshall. This is on Thursday, June 5th, 1947, at my alma mater, Harvard University, announcing what I think was called the European Aid Program. Does that sound right, folks? European Aid Program at the time? Marshall, I think, is a very important figure. A former war general, 5-star general. We don't have 5 stars anymore. Former 5-star general, Army general, went over to succeed Burns in State Department and laid out on this commencement day at Harvard the basis of what ultimately become known as the Marshall Plan. Again, you talk about seizing history, not obvious to everybody that this is what we should be doing. This is a plan that in today's dollars was worth about 100 billion US dollars, spent between 1948 and 1952, offered to the Soviet Union and their allies, which they declined. About 12 or 13 billion US of the amount was spent in then West Germany. And Marshall had, I tell you, there are a lot of lessons. Never ignore the lessons of history. I say this particularly to the folks who are currently going to get your, who are closest to university and in some cases to teaching. Never ignore the lessons of history and never assume that they can't be repeated, either good or bad. And here's the lesson that I take from this. Other than the enormous foresight to invest, I believe the most important diplomatic initiative in the history of mankind. Not just of Europe, not just of modern mankind, of mankind, period. One element of this, and Marshall was, I think, particularly insightful here, is if you took aid from the Marshall Plan, there was a string attached to it. You had to go to Paris every once in a while and sit down with the other countries that were getting the aid. That put France sitting at the same table, essentially for the first time, beside Germany, beginning in 1948. As you can imagine, that was not necessarily comfortable for either the French nor the Germans. But I'll tell you something, look at the relationship France and Germany has these 60-odd years later. Never mind 60-odd years later. Look at the relationship they had under Adenauer and the French leadership even 5 or 10 years later. The fact of the matter is you have to start somewhere. Even if you don't like somebody, even if you have got bad history, even if you disagree, you got to get to the table. And there's a guy who I work for today who's all about getting people to the table, whether you agree with them or not.